Hey everyone, I hope you've all been enjoying the new Bloodborne series I'll be running on the channel from here on, but I figured it was about time I rebooted the channel properly. And how better to kick things off on a channel called Link On than to start with a Zelda game. We're doing Ocarina of Time again, guys! Not a review this time, though. I've got all the gripes out of my system with the last one, so this time I'll be taking a look at the technical achievements and the things I actually find impressive about this game. Despite looking down on this game as arguably my least favorite Zelda game and seeing it as little more than a rehash of Link to the Past, there's plenty to say about what it achieved from a design perspective in terms of mechanics and the user experience, or UX design. When Ocarina of Time was in development, it wasn't as though Nintendo was going into 3D development blindly. As many of you probably already know, Mario 64 had come out just 2 years prior, at least in the West. I won't go too in-depth with the development history, but suffice it to say the best thing to arise in the design philosophy of Nintendo during Mario 64's development was the focus on making player movement engaging first and foremost, as well as Yoshiaki Koizumi's influence in making the camera an invisible part of the player's experience. Turbo Button actually did a great video on this, link in the description. And I think this philosophy is best represented in its early days by Ocarina of Time, where the camera control is limited solely to first-person viewing and Z targeting. With the exception of utilizing targeting in combat, much of the camera interaction is passive and is generally reliable enough that it won't require much fiddling. I'll admit I was a bit thrown off not being able to adjust the camera at will with the way games are designed these days, but once I got used to it again, I actually found it to be a much better experience. While this principle isn't applicable to every form of game design, it can work in a structured experience like this, and it works well in this and continued to do so in pretty much every Zelda game to come out since, with the exception of Zelda Wind Waker and more notably Breath of the Wild. I won't be going into the combat here, as I've got a whole series lined up for that, but I do want to dig into Z targeting a bit. It's not a perfect system, but it's hard not to appreciate how it alleviates the problems that often arise from combat in 3D space. Its impact cannot be ignored, as its influence can be seen in many action games, perhaps most notably with the Metroid series and hell, even Metroid Prime. An unfortunate side effect of the move to 3D is that many of the dungeons feel like tutorial for movement in a 3D space. This is a problem that was largely avoided in Mario 64 since your abilities had wide application and were consistent over the course of the entire game. Unlike Mario, however, Ocarina of Time's navigation is largely contingent on items obtained in dungeons, resulting in them reevaluating your abilities to navigate a 3D space constantly, even when it's not necessary. One of the more curious design decisions that I mentioned in my original review is the stupid Silver Rupee gathering puzzles, which are introduced fairly late in the game and only serve to test your movement, which I honestly think would have been more appropriate in the earlier dungeons. Of course, this poor handling of level design because of the constant introduction of new items also means that until the late game, the puzzles were neutered. I imagine the only reason that later stages didn't suffer from a similar issue is because they basically recycled existing items with extra bells and whistles, i.e. long shot, hover boots, and mirror shield. Had they continued to add new items instead, I have little doubt they would have continued with the weak puzzle design. While the importance of learning to navigate 3D space in the early days of 3D gaming cannot be understated, it shouldn't come at the cost of appropriate difficulty curves. I suppose I had a few more gripes in my system after all. Anyway, with this terrible segue, let's move on to the visual design of the game. Now, I know I said in my review that I think the game's graphics look like garbage by today's standards, but perhaps it was because I vented all my frustrations in that review, but I've come to appreciate the game's art direction to a certain extent. I still firmly believe that the definitive visual style for the game is best represented in the 3DS remake. The N64 version does a good job at conveying memorable character designs through a combination of unique designs and expressive animation. While I still feel many of the characters of this game lack depth, with the exceptions of the non-human races, few, if any, NPC models and textures are reused in different locations, and therefore stand out to this day. I don't think there's a person on Earth that's played this game that can't remember the Carpenters, the Cuckoo Lady, or the mopey dickhead that whinges at you whenever you talk to him. Hell, there's even a few NPCs that you can miss entirely. And even then, their designs weren't skipped out on. Hell, there's an NPC in the Gerudo Desert that I didn't even know existed for years before I finally stumbled upon him by accident. Yes, I missed the sign. Memorable visual aspects aren't just limited to the NPCs either. While not particularly expressive, the movement animations for Link have a certain weight to them that was uncommon in a lot of action-adventure games at the time, as I recall. And while not perfect, this Link still has a lot more expression than the sociopathic murder child protagonist of Pokemon Sun and Moon. Just look at those eyes. Those are the eyes of a killer. The game also utilizes to great effect unique moving textures when trying to demonstrate the organic or slimy appearance of certain enemies or locations, most notably the like-likes and the entirety of Jabu Jabu's belly, which I personally find to be a visual delight, and a fairly creative level that isn't overly reliant on its gimmick item. It's probably the best example of how this game uses its visuals to sell a dungeon's atmosphere, alongside the music, of course. I suppose to wrap things up, I best close out with the boss designs as well. While not particularly interesting fights, they do a great job at sticking to your memory. I think Goma stands out to me the most in this game, possibly by virtue of the fight's beginning being entirely contingent on player agency, with the fight not even starting until you look it in the eye. Every boss, even the bad ones, have a strong, weighty animation to them and a design that really drives home the atmosphere of their respective dungeons. And they also set the tone for what should be amazing boss fights. Hell, they even took it a step further than some of the later Zelda games by giving each boss a unique death animation. Some of them are just incredible to look at, even today. Ocarina of Time is far from the perfect game that people often make it out to be. Perhaps safe is a better word, but there's no denying the impact it's had on the gaming industry, and more importantly, its mark on history. I still hold that it's a rehash of Link to the Past, but in 3D. But with that existing structure, it allowed them room to experiment with the controls and design in ways that might have otherwise been hampered by focusing too much on level design structure and making it too unique from the previous game. Overall, I'd say that this is definitely a game worth remembering and playing, especially for those that might not have tried it. You may even get something out of it that I didn't. If you enjoyed this video, and would like to see more videos like it in the future, be sure to like and subscribe. If you've got constructive feedback, positive or negative, your comments are always appreciated. If you want to help me not starve to death, I also have a Patreon, which I'm not really promoting all that much. And with that, have a great night, and I'll see y'all next time.
You never see it coming.